Welcome to Spotlight on Six Star Cruises. I'm your host, Karen Worrall, cruise and destination expert for Six Star Cruises. And in this special series, I'm exploring expedition cruising with Seabourn Cruises, with my very special guest, Robin West, who is the Vice President and General Manager of Seabourn Expeditions. This episode is all about cruising to Antarctica. So let's begin by taking a very quick peek at the Great White Continent. The mystique of Antarctica, remote, rugged and cold, is like nowhere on Earth. The only continent unpopulated by humans draws people to it for its nature and serene atmosphere. Antarctica is where the true explorers go to seek that once-in-a-lifetime experience. It is one of the most remote places on the planet, where few people have ever been, let alone stood on it. Everyone who visits says it's the best trip they've ever taken. It is the home to maybe surprisingly abundant wildlife, including Weddell seals, and there's dramatic scenery including ice cliffs and ice flows, which you can get close to on Zodiac boats and kayaks, and maybe even step foot on the continent to get closer to the action. I have my very special guest for this series back with me again today, Robin West, who's Vice President and General Manager of Seabourn Expeditions. Now, Robin is going to get in depth telling us about Seabourn Expeditions cruises to Antarctica. So, hi, Robin. Thank you again for joining me today. How are you today?
Hi, Karen. Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Look forward to chatting about one of my favorite destinations in the world.
Wonderful. So going to Antarctica is one of the most exciting expedition cruises that there is, which I'm sure lots of people would agree with. And I'm sure you would too. You've just said it's one of your favorites, Robin. So what is a cruise to Antarctica with Seabourn like?
So, with Seabourn, going down to Antarctica, like with so many other destinations, whereas it's about showcasing an incredible area. It's about sharing the history, and it's about bringing the destination to life. The natural history down in Antarctica is fantastic. But on an expedition, on a seaborne expedition down in Antarctica, our goal, and like many expedition companies, there's no set itinerary. So if you have a look on our website, you'll see for 5 days the Seabourn Antarctic experience. And so what that does is it gives the captain, it gives the expedition leader the real flexibility to build and design an itinerary in the field based on weather conditions, ice conditions, and also based on what's happened so far on the expedition. When you're going down to Antarctica, you want to really make sure that the guests get to see all those little bits of Antarctica that make the complete package. So you want to make sure they see as many different penguin species as possible. You want to make sure they go visit a research station. You want to make sure that they have an opportunity to go for a walk or a hike, see glaciers. You want to make sure that you see some of the incredibly beautiful scenic passages like the Lemaire Channel, the Aurora. So the itinerary is very much massaged and molded based on what we'd still like to see and based on what we've actually seen. But on a day-to-day basis on board an expedition ship with Seabourn, the day would be split into two. You would have a morning operation and an afternoon operation. And during lunch, you would reposition between two different areas. So in the morning, we could, for example, be at Half Moon Island. We could be in a Zodiac cruise. We could be in a Zodiac landing. We might have the kayaks out. Midday, we pack up and then we head to another destination. Afternoon, we could be at Whalers Bay, Yankee Harbor. We could be somewhere else in the South Shetland Islands. And if we did a Zodiac tour in the morning, maybe in the afternoon, we're looking at doing a landing to get the guests ashore to experience wildlife, to look at penguins. And again, the submarines might be operating, the kayaks. So it's quite an active day, but it's generally split into two sections, a morning operation, afternoon operation. And then that doesn't really mean it's the end of the day. We come back on board, there's recap and briefing, and then we might opt to explore and look for whales, or we might look to do scenic cruising. So the days are really full with just these incredible experiences that Antarctica has to offer.
Wow, that is fascinating. There's so much to do. I love the way that it's separated into morning, afternoon, and evening segments as well, and the flexibility. You can follow the nature, follow the weather possibly, follow the interests, and get the most out of the whole experience. That's very unique and that's really interesting. So, what makes an expedition cruise to Antarctica different to cruising there with a premium cruise line?
Um, so, we we spoke a little bit about this once before in terms of designing a product that is really no compromise in terms of the luxury experience on board and the experience off the vessel. So, you know, there are a number of other operators out there who refer to themselves as luxury, and they have aspects of luxury. They may have a nice new ship, they may have an aspect of luxury, but from my years of experience in the expedition industry, Seabourn is one of the only brands that has a true ultra luxury experience from start to finish, and that there is no compromise in terms of this product. Seabourn Venture is without a doubt the world's most luxurious expedition vessel in terms of the amenities on board, in terms of the space, the guest to crew ratio, the guest to space ratio, the amount of open decks that we have, the size of the expedition team, the quality of the food, the service, the experience on board, the expedition team. It's truly in a league of its own. It's something quite special.
Wonderful. So, where do you go on an Antarctic expedition with Seabourn? What is the appeal of each of these places? Now, as you mentioned, the itineraries can change slightly depending on where you can get to, the weather. So, can you tell me a little bit more about some of the areas that you go to in Antarctica?
A typical sailing down to Antarctica leaves from Ushuaia. You have 2 days at sea crossing the Drake Passage, and the Drake Passage has a reputation for being rough, but it's it's not rough every single day, and that's, I think, where that reputation is not really warranted. It has moments where it's rough, and that can be for sure, but it's not rough every single day. So sometimes you go across the Drake and you have the Drake Lake, and other times you have a bit more swell. But, to be honest, when you move into the Drake Passage, you want 20, 25 knots of wind. You want some swell, because if you don't have that, you actually miss out on an experience. And that experience is being on the outer decks, watching wandering albatrosses, southern giant petrels, kind of coming past you at eye level from the ship as they're kind of doing this dynamic soaring and following the vessel. So there's some fantastic stuff to see as you're crossing the Drake Passage. When we get down to Antarctica, there's kind of a few areas in Antarctica. You've got really the South Shetland Islands, which is the most northerly group of islands from the peninsula. And there's some fantastic stuff to see there, from Deception Island to Yankee Harbor to some of the stations to Half Moon Island. And then, of course, from there, you come across the Gerlache and you come down towards the Antarctic Peninsula itself. You can then, of course, move to the very tip of the Antarctic Peninsula, to Antarctic Sound, where there's a lot of tabular icebergs that come out from the Weddell Sea. You've got more Adelie penguins in those areas. And then, of course, you head further south down the peninsula, down into areas like Nico Harbor, Paradise Bay, Cooperville Island. And from there, even further south, down through areas like the Gerlache, the Irera. You're coming into the Lemaire Channel, which is quite famously known in Antarctica. And there's this incredibly beautiful passage that kind of brings you almost like from a very closed environment out into an open area again with islands and things like that. So the areas we explore on an expedition down in Antarctica again depends on the weather and the ice conditions. Slightly later in the season, you can go further south. Later in the season too, you have the humpback whales and a lot of the whale species down in much larger numbers. But going early in the season is also incredible. Everything's white. It's all snow. It's crisp. It's clean. It's a different experience. And so, to be honest, there is no bad time to go down to Antarctica. There's always, and I know guests who've been to Antarctica 5, 6, 7 times, because you see different things, and the only way to really explain it is the first time you go to Antarctica, you're kind of like, wow, and you're just like big eyes, and you're just staring at massive mountains and ice and glaciers. But the more you go to Antarctica, the more your vision starts to go from way out there to really very, very focused and narrow. And now you're starting to look for a skewer chick. You're starting to watch the penguin behavior as they feed the young, or as the one comes to the nest and they swap out. You start to focus on all the little things that really start to make it exciting and incredible. So it's a fantastic experience in terms of where we go and what we see.
And that's something that's really interesting that you commented on, is that people want to come back multiple times, and that it's not just a bucket list place that you go and visit and tick off and say that you've seen it. There's really so much more to see, and you can go multiple times to get more involved, which is wonderful.
Yeah, it people fall in love with Antarctica. They start to realize that even if they went back 50 times, they would have 50 different experiences. And so it's incredible.
So, can you tell us a little bit about what is involved in getting a cruise ship approved to cruise into Antarctica?
Yes, of course. So going to Antarctica does involve, uh, let's say, applications and paperwork in terms of being allowed to go down to Antarctica. First of all, I think we need to start with the Antarctic Treaty. So Antarctica has been dedicated to peace and science, and we have many countries that have signed the Antarctic Treaty that agree and abide by those rules and regulations set up by the Antarctic Treaty. In addition to that, there is an organization, a member organization called IATA, and IATA is the International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators. I was very fortunate and privileged to be able to sit on the executive committee for the last 3 or 4 years. And so what you have is really a group of competitors who are working together with a common interest to preserve Antarctica for future generations and to promote tourism with the least amount of impact possible down in Antarctica. And so IATA has been around for a number of years. If you're wanting to go to Antarctica, you need to be a member of IATA. There are a lot of rules and regulations that IATA helps manage in terms of site guidelines, wildlife watching guidelines. A lot of that has been produced and created by actual in-field scientists who've studied wildlife. And so when you go to, for example, Coolville Island, there is an actual site guideline as to where you can go, what you can do based on the season, based on wildlife, based on it's fantastic. They really do an incredible job. So in addition to that, of course, we also have to apply through permits through our national regulatory body. So we're a US-based company. So through the US State Department, we also apply for permits to be able to operate down in Antarctica. And so between the permit applications through the US State Department, being a member of IATA, and obviously meeting all those regulations, you are then permitted to be able to head down to Antarctica and operate in Antarctica.
Wow, that's a lot of permits to get through there. But it sounds like it's definitely necessary to protect Antarctica and keep the area safe and have people visit. But as you say, do no harm. You have to look after it, which is wonderful and responsible, and just what needs to be done. So, can I ask, what is the atmosphere like in Antarctica?
So the atmosphere in Antarctica is it's I would have to say it's passion. It's expedition team members who are down in Antarctica are there because they have an absolute passion for Antarctica. That passion tends to be contagious, and that passion slowly starts to move across towards the guests. And funniest things, you'll see guests on their hands and knees looking at the tiniest thing and making it out like it's the most incredible thing they've ever seen in the world. And so the atmosphere on board is and we spoke about this a little bit before, where guests come on board, they're a little bit reserved, they're maybe a little bit nervous about that first Zodiac tour. But as soon as they've had that first Zodiac tour, as soon as they've experienced Antarctica, it's you have this vibe on board the ship. The first recap and briefing once you've been in Antarctica, it's just people are just ecstatic about sharing images, what they saw, what they did. And so it's a fantastic experience. And it's probably one of the most heightened atmospheres that you get anywhere in the world on an expedition ship. Everyone's just super excited. I know what's sometimes fascinating is, you come across the Drake Passage, and it's always fantastic to be able to brief the guest that night before you get to Antarctica, and you say to the guest, you've read about Antarctica, you've seen documentaries about Antarctica, but tomorrow morning when you wake up, you will see Antarctica for the first time. and maybe it's Livingston Island, maybe it's the dramatic mountains, but it blows people away every single time. It really is fantastic.
Wow, well, the passion is definitely contagious. I already definitely wanted to go to Antarctica and on an expedition cruise, but the more I'm talking to you, Robin, the more I'm thinking, I want to go now. It sounds absolutely incredible. Now, another really important aspect about Antarctica is the wildlife. So, what kind of wildlife do you get to see here, and do you get to get close to any of it?
So the wildlife in Antarctica is really a highlight. It's incredible to come ashore in these remote islands and explore penguin rookeries. Um, when we're down in Antarctica, and we spoke about this a little bit before, you're wanting to design an itinerary to ensure that you see a little bit of everything. So on a typical trip down to Antarctica, you're wanting to see all three penguin species. So down in Antarctica, you have what's referred to as the brush-tail family, and those three penguin species are the Adelie, the chinstrap, and the gentoo. Those are the three main penguin species that guests will see down on the peninsula. You may have the odd not lost, but out of place king penguin that might pop up. You might have the odd macaroni, but that's quite rare. Typically, we're designing an itinerary to explore destinations and landing sites that will allow you to see the three penguin species. Beyond that, there's also the opportunity to see seals, holdouts on shore, holdouts on ice floes. So we may be looking at fur seals, leopard seals, Weddell seals, crab-eater seals, generally 3 or 4 species. Very likely to see those when you're down in Antarctica on the peninsula. And then, of course, whales. The whales are there the entire season, but as we start to get late January, early February, the whales start to come down in large numbers. And so from humpback whales to minke whales to fin whales, it's fantastic to see the number of whales and how the whale population has recovered down in Antarctica. But again, in terms of getting close to the wildlife, there are wildlife watching guidelines that are set out by IATA, and there's rules and regulations to how close you can approach and get to wildlife. But the wildlife don't have those rules or regulations, and they don't know them. So you could be in a zodiac and you could have a leopard seal swim around the zodiac and right up next to the zodiac. You could have a humpback whale swim by. I know we've had some incredible minke encounters in places like Nico Harbor where the zodiacs literally just drift. You plan to do the zodiac tour for an hour, hour and a half, and you end up staying in one area drifting, and you've got a minke whale swimming around the boats. Shoreside, the penguins, they're very close to you. Even if you're using an iPhone, you can get a full frame picture of probably just the eye and the beak. You're really quite close to some of the wildlife. Obviously, the expedition staff are out in the field, and they're ensuring that all those rules and regulations are being followed, and that there's no impact in terms of the experience between the wildlife and the guests that are ashore. But the wildlife encounters in Antarctica, from shoreside, from a zodiac, and even from the ship, which creates an incredible platform, is something quite special, and something to talk about on Seabourn Venture that almost no other expedition ship has. We have on board the vessel, mounted on the mast, a 4K Cineflex camera with a 1224 zoom. And we can zoom in on wildlife and broadcast that onto every single piece of glass on board the ship. So some of the wildlife encounters we've had in the Arctic of polar bears through that camera has been incredible.
Wow, that is amazing. And as you say, the humans have rules to safeguard the animals, but the animals don't have the same rules. That's incredible. The stories that you must have about the wildlife that you've seen is just absolutely spectacular. I want to go so much.
And what's fantastic is, what you're aiming for and trying to achieve in Antarctica or anywhere in the world is you're really wanting that wildlife encounter to be managed and controlled by the wildlife. That's when you're really having an incredible experience. When you put yourself in the environment, you're there, and all of a sudden a whale comes over and it's in charge of that entire interaction, and it comes and goes as it feels comfortable, and that's fantastic.
Absolutely. So you know that you're seeing them in their natural habitat. This isn't a zoo. This isn't a safari park. It's not an aquarium. This isn't anything that the animal is constricted in. This is where they live. This is their home. And as you say, they control it.
We're the visitors.
Absolutely, as we should be. Now, my final question about Antarctica is, what are your top recommendations of things to do on an Antarctic expedition cruise with Seabourn?
So what I'd recommend you do, and I say this to guests so often, is buy the right equipment to be able to be comfortable to spend as much time outside as possible. I used to work with an expedition colleague who used to always introduce himself at the start of an expedition, and he always used to make the same joke: smokers see more. And the reason being is because they're on the outer deck. They're there looking and they're seeing more. And so that's one of the recommendations I always make to guests is go out, buy the right gear, buy layers, make sure that you're dressed properly so that you can go out onto the bow of the vessel and you can stay there comfortably for 4 or 5 hours. Because during those 4 or 5 hours, the expedition team are going to be out there and they'll be pointing things out, they'll be seeing things. And so, also do everything that the expedition team offers. The expedition team might decide to wake you up at 4 o'clock in the morning. There's a reason for that. That's probably the one you don't want to miss because we're planning. So do everything that the expedition team has on offer. I would also highly recommend, doing a kayak experience. Going kayaking in Antarctica, you've got that, and we specifically designed the program to be away from the rest of the operation. So you feel like you're the only people in Antarctica. You're at water level, you're paddling in silence, you're hearing the crackling of the ice, you're moving from one ice floe to the next to look at wildlife. Kayaking in Antarctica is a magical experience. And of course, we have the submarines on board. That is an entire expedition all on its own. There have been operators over the years that have operated scuba diving in Antarctica. And so, yes, people have put their head under the water and they have gone down to maybe 20, 30 meters, 60, 100 feet. But the submarines we carry on board can dive to depths of 1,000 feet or 300 meters. So the number of people who have actually gone underwater beyond 50, 60 meters in Antarctica is literally a handful. That is exploration opportunity like you're not going to get anywhere else in the world, to be able to go down to 60, 70, 80, 100 meters in Antarctica and explore what is under the water in Antarctica. That's a real privilege to be able to do something like that. So, I really would encourage people to dress properly, spend as much time as they can on the outer deck, join everything that is offered, and then, of course, do those slightly different experiences, go kayaking, go on a submarine dive, and get that full experience of what Antarctica has to offer.
Well, those sound like the best tips for it, and you are really the expert on all of this. So if anyone watching this is going on one of these expeditions or is thinking about booking one, do everything that Robin said, and I'll be doing the same when I go too. So thank you very much again for joining me, Robin. Next time we're going to be talking about the Arctic. So thanks for joining me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. Well, that's it from Robin and me in Antarctica, and we will see you next time when we talk in depth about the Arctic. Bon voyage!